I think the research in exotics in general is only speeding up. We're seeing more published reference ranges. I said more treatment options. For a long time, we've said exotic pet are growing. So the body of work, the body of knowledge we have on them is also in this rapid expansion period, just as people are getting more of these types of pets.
Hey, Vetfolio Voice friends! I had so much fun recording this episode with our very own Chief Veterinary Officer, Dr. Dana Varble, who joined me to talk about reptile husbandry and reptile medicine. I started trying to learn more about reptile husbandry and medicine when my daughter asked for a leopard gecko. And this little friend has not yet joined our family, but my reading kind of opened my eyes to how much goes into proper reptile care and how much we still don't know about these guys. However, as Dana and I talk about here, reptiles are becoming increasingly popular as pets, and we're seeing more and better options for enclosures, lighting, temperature, diet, humidity, all these things, as well as increasing research into preventative care, drugs, appropriate dosing, all of this for reptiles. Now, she's the expert, so I'll let her take it from here, but I hope you find this conversation as fascinating and as helpful as I did. Dr. Dana Varble received her DVM from the University of Illinois. While completing her DVM, Dr. Varble pursued a non-traditional clinical rotation schedule, fulfilling her academic requirements at a variety of alternate locations, including the University of Tennessee, Louisiana State University, Brookfield Zoo, and the University of Pretoria in South Africa. She has a background in clinical medicine, including exotics, small animal general practice, and emergency medicine, and still practices part-time, picking up relief shifts, as well as working at Chicago Exotics Animal Hospital in Skokie, Illinois. She's a national and international speaker in the field of herpetological and exotic animal medicine and surgery, and has authored several publications in that field. In keeping with her interest in organized veterinary medicine, Dr. Varble served on the board of directors for the Association of Reptilian and Amphibian Veterinarians and was president of ARAV from 2012 to 2013. She's also a member of the American Veterinary Medical Association and the Association of Exotic Mammal Veterinarians. She joined the NAVC in 2015, where her role has continued to evolve. In 2020, she was named the Chief Veterinary Officer for NAVC. Needless to say, she has all the qualifications to speak on this subject, so let's go ahead and get into it and learn more about reptiles.
Nutrition is the cornerstone of our patients' health and happiness. The veterinary healthcare team should be the ultimate source for top-notch pet nutrition info. When clients see how the right diet helps their pets stay healthy and happy, they visit us more often. Remember, good nutrition is essential. It's smart business and great medicine. Enroll in the NAVC Pet Nutrition Coach certification today on vetfolio.com.
I'm super excited for this episode because I'm joined by our Chief Veterinary Officer, Dr. Dana Varble, and we have had so much fun doing several episodes in the past, and I love these conversations because I just never know where they're going to go, where we're going to end up. So welcome, Dana. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me today.
For this episode, we're going to talk about reptiles because that's one of my favorite things to pick your brain about is, different species outside of dog and cat medicine. And so we kind of, I don't know, maybe it'll become the official title, like a reptile walks into a bar. More so, they usually don't do that. So walks into a clinic, we'll say. I mean, at least I assume they don't normally walk into bars.
Yeah, it happens. It happens.
I suppose it depends on where you are in the world.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
In Florida, you guys have animals walk into your houses, so I'm sure they walk into bars.
I was driving down the dirt road to my house. This was several years ago, and there was an alligator just crossing the road, and I was like, "Hey, buddy," and he was just like, "What's up?" and walked off into the woods, and that was the last I saw of him.
So in theory, I'm sure in Florida, somewhere at some point, a significant size reptile has walked into a bar. I think we can be confident in that.
I would agree. I think we can say with certainty somewhere in Florida, a giant reptile has been in a bar at one point or another, and probably at multiple points.
Yes. Probably multiple points every year. So, yeah,
Yes. Yes. I would
cool.
agree with this. It's a wild and crazy place down here.
It is Florida.
Yes. Well, kind of thinking clinically, taking our reptiles out of the bar and putting them into a clinic. What are some of the common reasons we might see a reptile in a clinic? I mean, are we seeing reptiles for annual exams the way that we do with our dog and cat species?
So everyone knows I do work in a clinic that is limited to exotic pets. And we do recommend annual exams for reptiles. The interesting thing is obviously some reptiles live, decades longer than a dog or cat. I myself have several snakes. You can see behind me, they're well into the decades range, so your average ball python can easily live into their 20s, 30s, 40s, or even 50s. So in annual exams, sometimes a lot doesn't change here for those guys, but that's nice. That means that we really have a lot of opportunity to catch things early. More commonly, bearded dragons have a very similar lifespan to dogs and cats. So, we see them typically a couple times when they're young, make sure they're growing appropriately. We're not seeing any early problems. And then, yeah, an annual exam until they reach about 8 or so, 9 years of age. And then I would love to see them every 6 months, the same way we would see dogs and cats. And then, kind of the list goes on and on as we look at things like box turtles, certainly can live into their 40s, but most of the time in captivity, we're looking at 10, 20 years. So annual exams. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm picturing an annual exam. I like reptiles. I think they're neat, but I have no idea what I'm doing clinically with a reptile. So I have kind of a system when I do my dog and cat exams of, how I go nose to toes and do it the same way pretty much every time so I don't miss anything. What's kind of your system on an annual exam on what we're assuming is an otherwise healthy reptile?
Yeah, I mean, very similar. You're looking at their mouth. Bearded dragons get a lot of dental disease as they age, believe it or not. So another similarity there. Something else we always need to check out. Looking at skin, toes, when they're young, obviously you're looking at growth rates. How are they growing? For turtles and tortoises, you're looking at how their shell is developing. That's a big clue as to their diet and husbandry conditions and if they're appropriate. We're also, looking at vent, feeling coelom, just kind of checking everything out. The harder thing with reptiles is, again, a little bit better at hiding diseases. So even in younger animals, we're recommending blood work pretty much right off the bat. Obviously, when they're hatchlings and they weigh, 10 grams, maybe not as a concern, but, it's definitely an adult bearded dragon, an adult turtle tortoise, an adult snake. It's really nice to get that annual blood work as well. So then we have a baseline when they're healthy. So if something were to arise, they were develop some signs or symptoms, we have something to check against too. So.
And are we looking for the same sort of markers we'd look for in dogs and cats, like white cell elevations, anemia, kidney disease, liver function? Are they similar parameters?
Sort of. That's when we start getting into, dogs are one species, cats are one species, reptiles are, I'd have to look up it. We're looking at like 10,000 species. So,
Sure.
a lot of variation there. But yeah, white blood cell changes, red blood cell changes are the big things. Obviously, most reptiles don't produce BUN and creatinine the same way mammals do. So we're looking at different parameters. A lot of times uric acid, protein levels are another key indicator of reptile health that we're trying to look at year to year. And the hard thing can be, sometimes with dogs and cats, we have these nice, lovely reference ranges that are based on thousands or sometimes, millions of samples. A lot of times we look at the reference ranges for ball python and we go back and we look at the publication, it's based on 20 animals or 30. So again, really nice if you have a healthy animal, if you have a baseline for that animal that you can compare to that individual, and you can really track it over time or how things change over time. If you have a uric acid when they're 3, that's say 3.6, depending on the species. And then you have one 7 years later that's 13 or 15 or 18. Oh, we may have a problem there, or something's changed. So those kinds of indicators, a little bit different how we do it, but it's also kind of the same.
Sure, sure. I think it's a good, kind of a good argument for doing annual blood work to say we don't have well established reference ranges. So let's find out what your animal looks like when everything looks good, we're eating, we're drinking, we're healthy, and all of this kind of stuff. And then we can compare it and know over time what's normal for your animal because yeah, down the road we may have no idea.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Does your particular species that you have at home look a little different than the published reference ranges? Yeah, and we even know, I mean, as crazy as this sounds, we even know time of year matters. Are
Mm.
they in the middle of brumation in their cold season and they have different, literally have different blood work then than they do in the middle of summer? We know that's true. The research has been shown that many species do have dramatically different blood work depending on the time of year. So another plug for the annual exam being the same time of year is it really helps keep that, remove one extra variable, if you will, to the whole what does it look like now kind of a thing.
That's really cool to know,
Yeah.
just yeah, and a lot of good advice to give reptile owners. Like, if you really want to know what, if this blood work is normal, then we're gonna have to do it more than a few times.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
I'm curious your opinion, especially following COVID and like there was this big boom in the veterinary industry in general, but certainly just small animals in general, reptiles being one of them, just kind of growing in popularity and I think there's a lot wider ownership, just people who have reptiles. So with having these published reference ranges that are like you said like 20 ball pythons or something like that,
Yeah.
do you think we're going to see that change over time now that they're becoming more popular?
Yeah, hugely. I think the research in exotics in general is only speeding up. I think we're seeing more published reference ranges. Think we're seeing more treatment options. For a long time, we've said exotic pets, especially, are growing. So the body of work, the body of knowledge we have on them is also in this rapid expansion period, just as people are getting more of these types of pets. In fact, even before COVID, pet turtles and tortoises were one of the fastest growing pet populations in the US. I know more people that have had turtles now than you would believe. We know more about them. We've got more diet information, we've got more husbandry information. Also, the pet industry has responded. Like, we have better products for them. We have better lights. We have better substrates. We have better cage setups. We have better hides. So, we're making it easier for the pet owner to provide the right husbandry, to provide welfare for these guys. So, all of a sudden, the thought of having, to drive across town to buy a UV light every 6 months has gone away. You know, it's
Absolutely.
a lot easier. And now we have, again, all these fun cages that are part of your decoration, part of your house, and it's really helped.
Yeah, you're exactly like the driving across town. I have fish,
Yeah,
and I definitely broke my heater one day. And then also our power went out, and when the filter turned back on, burned up a motor. And
yeah.
yeah, I had that moment of like, I live out in the middle of nowhere. So I'm like, what? Do I have to drive into Gainesville like right now and go get a heater, go get a, whatever it is I need? No, they get delivered right to your door the next
Yeah,
day. I'm
they
like,
do.
this is great.
Yeah, and online retailers have invested in this because, again, it's good for pets. It's good for people to have options, to have these things readily available. And yeah, we've had more fish tank heaters burn out in the last like 3 years than I ever thought possible. And that's not a knock on the heaters. There was a switch problem. So to the heater manufacturers out there, don't panic. It was an us problem, not a you problem. But it's nice for reptiles too. We have backup lights and we have backup UV lights, backup heat lights, and all of these great things that are more readily available now. So it's really good. Yeah.
That makes sense. I, have certainly with my fish, have been in this era where everything is readily available. So I didn't really consider it being difficult to source some of the resources that you would need for good husbandry for reptiles
Mhm.
prior to just the last few years. And kind of along those lines with husbandry, I would imagine like husbandry issues are one of the major reasons that reptiles present sick and not doing well. What are some of the major husbandry issues you see and how do you talk to owners about those?
Yeah, I mean, it's still a cornerstone of reptile health. I mean, the good news is like we talked about, easier now. It's easier. Like,
Yes.
You can point people, you can send them links, you can send them great online resources. You can really address things much faster with them, which has made a huge impact to reptile husbandry. So, it used to be like we'd see a reptile owner and you'd be like, okay, everything is wrong. Every single thing you're doing is
Sure.
wrong. We're going to start from scratch. Usually it's a little more subtle, which is good. It's good for reptiles, it's good for people. But again, it means we as veterinarians have to really investigate more and find those maybe subtle deficiencies, if you will, that help us. We really need to hone in and find the little things that are going to make a huge difference in their health. Probably the biggest one is still diet. You know,
Sure.
what are they eating? A lot of times, especially, early reptile owners really panic about them eating and eating well. So they'll feed them, for lack of a better word, junk food because
Right.
they're like, my box turtle loves strawberries, but that's all I feed him now. So he's now 2. He's only been eating strawberries for the last 2 years, and now we've got to really work on that because we're not getting protein, we're not getting calcium, we're not getting proper fiber, and we've got all these weird growth patterns because of it. So diet is the number one thing, and I think there's some great resources out there. um Plug for the Association of Reptile Amphibian Vets. They have great feeding guides for veterinarians. There's a lot of reptile and exotic based clinics that have wonderful feeding guides as well. So look into those. Feel free to share them with your clients, utilize them, look at what the subtleties are, look at like the small changes that you need to make just to make it ideal. So those are great resources for diet.
Which,
Oh,
Dana, let me jump in here. Like,
yeah.
please plug your clinic because I've perused those articles and those are really good too.
Yes.
So if people are looking for a
So
resource, there's some great articles
I
there.
do. I work for Chicago Exotics Animal Hospital. We have over the years utilized some of our veterinarians, some of our incredibly knowledgeable technicians to write and review and revise over time the articles that we have for care and husbandry, and they are on exoticpetvet.com. So feel free to use ours. They're well written, they're researched. We know that the information's correct, and they are updated too, which is always nice. So,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
they'll address these issues too. So, where I live, probably the second one we run into, Cassie, probably not as much in Florida, is, what heat range are we keeping these guys at? So, there are, again, great published guides out there about optimal heat ranges and what a basking spot should be. And almost all reptiles need a range. And that can be challenging because if you're in a cold environment or if you're in a really hot environment,
Yeah.
you could be keeping these animals either too hot or too cold and not providing that range. The other thing with the range is that we need an environment that's large enough to provide the range. So if they're in a very small enclosure and you've got a heat lamp over it, you're kind of cooking them. Yeah. You know?
Right, right. Absolutely. They have to, and I'm thinking of a friend of mine who has a beardy and,
Yep.
very, very big tank. And
Hmm.
yeah, and just the the warm side and then the cool side, there's a
Yeah.
lot of distance in between those two sides. And so you can see like a big range that this beardy has to experience. So you really have to kind of have some room to have a big enough enclosure.
Absolutely. And the other thing to think about too is as you design that enclosure and look for things like rocks and branches to put on it, the temperature, ideally you're using a heat source that's above, just like
The
the
sun.
sun above, yeah. Avoiding those heat rocks, avoiding, using maybe some heat pads just to raise the overall temperature in the space. But looking at, what's the basking spot. So the top of that branch, those reptile hammocks that are super cute that actually reptiles love. What's the range there, maybe 4 to 3 or 4 inches underneath that light is going to be a lot warmer than at the bottom of the cage. And that's great. But what if it's, 120, 140, 150 degrees and we're getting burns up there versus, is the bottom of the cage 65 degrees and too cool? And that's why we're having trouble getting these guys ideal. So it's great to have a thermometer in there, but you have to think about also moving it around every couple of days. And, especially when you're just getting a tank set up. So I always ask owners, I'm like, do you have a thermometer? Great. Do you move it around? Like, what's the temperature up here versus at the bottom away from all your heat sources? Have you looked at the range? And then is your reptile moving through the range too? Do they utilize all areas of the cage? Harder with some, harder with some species. Some of them are like very quiet and don't move a lot, so that can be challenging.
Yes, really, you gotta use all the range that I'm giving you. I've heard one of the other debates because my youngest has been asking for a leopard gecko, and we've told her yes, we just haven't quite pulled the trigger yet. But there was a lot of debate on like UV or no UV. They're like these are nocturnal, and so a lot of what I heard was no UV, but there was still some debate. It wasn't a solid consensus.
So it's a great question because we as veterinarians are still debating this point
That
for
was where I
people.
found the debate was amongst
Yes,
veterinarians.
and that's it's what's interesting. And it comes into this discussion of what is optimal versus what is adequate. So that's something we're learning about. Again, it's one of those areas of growing science with reptiles is that we know there are some species that absolute requirement for UV light. So, especially hot weather, desert, tropical animals have an absolute requirement for UV light. And with some animals, it's really, really high. We know that things like iguanas that are climbing trees, that are basking, that are out long periods of the day, have a really high requirement for UV light. They need stronger bulbs, they need them changed more often. They're very sensitive to the lack of UV light. Some of the turtles and tortoises are like that. Look, we need a ton of UV light. But if you have a snapping turtle that spends most of its life, in a murky pond at the bottom, do they need UV light? Do they even
Right.
utilize it? There's ongoing studies to determine this. So, it's a little challenging because again, those things are getting updated all the time. Leopard geckos are a great species to talk about because it's run the gamut now. They don't need UV light, they need a ton of UV light. And what we found is worse. They need some UV
Oh
light.
goodness. They need a little bit. Good
So
luck.
there's species like leopard geckos are actually crepuscular. So in the wild, they're most active, early parts of the day, rest through the heat of the day, and come out very active, like around sunset. That's when they do most of their hunting. It's when they're safest from predators. And what we've found is that they can absorb UV light. They can use that UV light to convert vitamin D to its active form. Not all species can. Not all species can absorb UV light. Not all species use it. But we know leopard geckos can. Bearded dragons are another, they
It
have to have
definitely
it.
can. Yeah.
Have to have it, yeah. And we know that ideally it's provided for them. But we know if we over provide it, if we put an iguana light on a leopard gecko, we can actually put them at risk of things like skin cancer and eye problems. So, which again makes sense. They're not spending the middle part of the afternoon in a super tropical environment sitting out on a black rock. That's not part of their life. An iguana, if you've seen them do that, yeah, they do. They do. So we're finding that just like mammals, there's an incredible variation here. So again, kind of have to guide an owner through that because if it's hard for us, it's really hard for owners. So a lot of times what we're saying with these in-between species now is to buy a lower power UV light and have it on either for a smaller portion of the day or to make sure basically that they have a place to hide and get away from it during the day so that. And the hard thing is that there are many leopard geckos in captivity that do just fine without a UV light, but there are also many leopard geckos in captivity that don't do fine without a light. So worse yet, species variation. I'm going to throw this one out. Individual variation.
Say it also depends on the actual. I mean, and we see that in dogs and cats
Yes.
too. It's and in
Yeah.
humans, it's to be expected, I suppose.
Yes. It's very challenging. So, there's some good, again, go back to the species guidelines, and look for it. And it's interesting that you bring this one up because the other new thing that we're seeing more and more in research is humidity and how
Yeah.
humidity plays a bigger part in, captive care and captive requirements. So I will share with you that I think a lot more animals, as we're providing these great diets and we've got their heat figured out and now we've got their light figured out and maybe we've got UV light figured out. What we're finding is we're seeing iguanas that live to be, mid-teens or blue-tongued skinks that live to be mid-teens. We're starting to see kidney disease in these guys at a higher rate. And one of our concerns, very similar to cats, is are we getting them enough water and are we getting them water in the way that they can utilize it? So, humidity's become a new issue that we're seeing become a concern in some reptiles. We want to make sure that tropical species that naturally exist in places like the Caribbean and the jungle and Florida
I was gonna say in the
are,
Everglades.
yeah, are getting humidity that is appropriate for them because maybe they are not taking in enough water through their diet. They're oftentimes not taking it in through their skin. Some of them will climb in a big old bath and are probably absorbing water and drinking water that way. Some don't. So humidity's become the new hot topic too of how can we get the humidity in a cage up to provide enough humidity for these guys long term. It's very challenging because if you've got a heat lamp going and a UV light going and a heat pad going, and you're trying to keep it humid, it can be very challenging. So the good news is pet industry has heard this, and we have things like automated misters and drip systems for reptile cages now. So again, another challenge that we're seeing, kind of advanced level reptile medicine stuff. Yeah.
This is so cool. It's like, what a time. I feel like this all the time because I just remember when I even like before I went to vet school and then certainly not long after I graduated for the first few years,
Hmm.
we just had very few veterinary specific drugs, let alone like husbandry systems that were really appropriate for all of the animals that we were trying to
Yeah.
work with. And now we've got like the pharmaceutical industry, not to start any debates here, but has exploded with
Yeah.
veterinary specific products that are making it so much easier to treat different disease processes. And then, the stuff that we're seeing, I'm thinking, in my experience with cats, like the microchip feeders and the way that the watering systems
Yeah.
work and all this stuff, we've got AI involved in this stuff. And I'm just like, man, what a time to be an animal health specialist, whatever
Yeah.
part of the industry you're in.
Well, and it's just about like before long, reptile cages used to mainly be like DIY projects, which some of them still are. And I have some owners who are like super into like creating this amazing habitat that's like biodiverse and good for them. But for most pet owners, they're like, I just want to go to the store. I want to buy the right things. They want to do good, right? I want to buy the right things. I don't have 3 months to build a custom cage for my Russian tortoise, but I
As much
want,
as I would love to.
yes. And a lot of them would love to, but they're like,
Yes.
what's realistic for me? And instead, you can provide them, general guidelines, and they could turn to the pet industry that, again, has really responded now. And they'll be like, they're sending me stuff. Sometimes I'll have pet owners send me stuff like I haven't even seen. They're like, I found this mister. And I'm like, looks amazing. Go for it. Tell me, give me your feedback. Find out if it works. It's just fun. It's really fun. I agree.
The husbandry part, I think, is so fun because, of course, the medicine. We're here to practice the medicine, but I don't know. I love preventative care and husbandry. No matter what species you're talking about, that's a huge part of your preventative care. So to learn about exactly the things that you're talking about, like how much UV light and the species variations, the individual variations, how are we getting them water, how are we making sure that their kidneys are protected, and it's just all these different ways to do it with the new products that are coming out. It's a way to get really creative, and you're providing just amazing care for these animals before they even step foot in the clinic.
Yeah. And I mean, it's good for us too, because like, I do feel like reptile medicine used to be like 99% husbandry. And don't get me wrong, it still is. It's still, again, getting down to asking all of the questions and really perfecting things and making sure things are perfect. But it's also now about, okay, you're actually doing everything right. I get to say that to more owners now. So I don't have to talk to you about diet. We need to focus on what the problem is because it's again now it's advanced. Now it's not just like you need different insects, you need calcium supplements. Sure, those things still come up, but now it's like, okay, we need to get down to infectious disease time and cancer care and surgery and reproductive care and things that are really important as well. So
And just
it's
takes the medicine to a whole new level now.
absolutely, absolutely. I completely agree. Yep.
So I am like a veterinary medicine addict. Like, hi, my name's Cassie. I have a problem. I feel like you can relate to this.
I can't. I can't. Yeah.
So I'll
Like, what did
go
you
and
do with your career? I became a veterinarian. Now I work for veterinarians. I work by veterinarians. Everything I do is yes.
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 And then I go home after doing that all day and I like turn on a veterinarian show and I'm like, let me see these things. So of course, like reptiles are involved here, right? And I'm watching this and I'm like, nope, I got nothing. I've not like this is nothing I've ever experienced before. So if someone like me who is, dogs and cats and some large animal stuff, but yeah, mostly dogs and cats these days. And I said, okay, I just want to be able to like do some of the more common things that reptiles might present for and feel comfortable in that arena. What would you say are like maybe the top things outside of husbandry to study up on and know about, and what kind of equipment would I need to have available?
It sounds really basic, but we don't often have them in dog and cat hospitals. Just one of those little gram scales, like the kitchens. They don't have to be expensive. Amazon has tons of them. They're, just a metal, easily disinfected gram scale, and some sort of bucket or basket that you can put on top of it, tear out, and keep an idea on weight on these guys. It's interesting. Some owners will do that at home, but they're doing it on their kitchen scale, which gives me, makes me nervous from like salmonella infectious
Salmonella,
disease. Please
yeah.
don't put any animal, dogs, cats, chickens, reptiles on your kitchen scale. Like it's not great. Get a separate scale. They're not expensive. So, and again, from a clinic standpoint, not only is it not expensive, you can use it for other things. You're going to find you're using it for things like kittens and puppies and weighing out, fluids and urine in and output and all these other things. So grab one of those off Amazon, throw it in the cabinet. You're going to find you're going to use it all the time. You may already have one, but if you don't, a good quality Doppler, so that, again, hopefully you're already using it for blood pressures. Make sure you've got it. There's been some great, actually, this is a brand new thing just came out. It's obviously with auscultation, it's hard to hear heart rates in most reptiles. Believe it or not, bearded dragons, one of the most common reptiles. You can often, not always, in an adult, also auscultate a heart rate because their heart, although it doesn't create like a sound in a empty cavity, it does beat against their sternum. So if you put your stethoscope there, it's pretty common that you can hear a heart rate. Takes a little bit of practice, not gonna lie. But I bet most veterinarians with a little bit of coaching could pick up on that. But now what do you do for all the other lizards whose heart doesn't beat against their sternum, for snakes who don't have that, for turtles who definitely don't have that? Where do you hear a heart rate? Doppler. And what we're finding is that a really cool new thing came out very recently. Lizards and pretty much all lizards and pretty much all snakes have a big artery in their head, right behind their eyes. In bearded dragons, it gets diseased sometimes, but it turns out very easy to put a Doppler right on top of their little head, right behind their eye, and get a heart rate. Way easier than trying to find the heart in a snake a third of the way down. Some of them are squirming around, moving. Turtles, you're like trying to press it in here. They're closing up on you, press it between their neck. Pardon me, they're podcasting, so you're not seeing me like wildly gesture here. But with turtles, you're trying to press between their neck and their forearm, not getting anything. So a good Doppler and watch a few videos. Again, super easy. I guarantee any veterinarian is going to be able to do it with like 5 minutes of coaching. So it's a great way to get a heart rate consistently and safely. So very cool, fun thing. So Doppler. Uh, Other thing I would say is check out your injectable meds. Like, do you have a handful of things that are gonna help? If you don't have alfaxalone, it has been an absolute dream for us who work in reptiles because lot of variability in anesthesia, analgesia techniques. Alfaxalone has changed all of that. So
Wow. And I suppose you're not seeing like tremors, seizures, stuff like that in reptiles.
no, we are seeing safe, consistent induction of anesthesia with, really predictable sedation times, predictable anesthesia times, the ability to intubate, again, very safely. We still use a lot of like Tilazol. So again, you may already have that on your large animal truck. That's still very useful. Ketamine, midazolam, those types of things. But the other thing I will add is, despite us trying many, many different ways to get oral antibiotics in reptiles, the absorption of those is so variable. So, you give it to them, oh, their stomach isn't digesting anything, and it sits in their stomach for hours, days, weeks, depends on when they ate last, depends on the species, depends on the heat, depends on the humidity. So, oral antibiotics in reptiles are just really unpredictable. Get a handful of injectable antibiotics. Get yourself some Fortas, some ceftazidime. Get yourself some injectable Baytril. Injectable Baytril's very stingy, and can cause problems. So, look at those antibiotic choices that you have and see if something will work. But injectable antibiotics are definitely the way to go with reptiles. And
I
then,
have to
yeah,
know large animal, small animal, bay troll, or does it matter?
it doesn't matter, and I've used
Okay,
both
that's exciting because man,
because,
there's a big difference
um,
between those two.
there is, but, if you're looking at a leopard gecko and you're like, you are desperate for antibiotics, and I know it might cause skin problems because, again, stingy, ouchy, just like it is in dogs and cats, but I know I've got this handy, and I feel like it's really critical. Go ahead and start that. There's published doses out there, which it's pretty much 10 mg per kg for everything. I won't I'm not making
It's like
making
ophthalmology,
bank
like
on anyone.
15 plus or
Yeah,
minus 5 for
give or
everything.
take. Yeah, it might, for most reptiles, it's once every 3 days, once every 5 days, once every other day. But you could definitely start with that. But if you're, these big tortoises, we're reaching for the large animal Baytril on them if we're reaching for it. But again, volumes can be a problem for them because they're monsters, So a lot of times we're going back to those third or fourth generation cephalosporins if it's warranted in those case. Another plug for antimicrobial resistance here. Look at your first choices first, because it's challenging, but there's a lot of good references for that. That's like a whole nother podcast. So first and second generation cephalosporins do work in reptiles. That that's
That's the
that's a long
take
short of
home.
that story. Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. Yes. So
Well, it's good to know because Baytril probably is something that's readily available
mhm.
on most shelves. So I could see it being easy to say, like, oh, let me just do Baytril. But I think that's good advice to be like, if you can do it with a cephalosporin, either maybe that's a better plan than doing Baytril. And if you can do it with a cephalosporin, maybe Baytril is not the right choice. Maybe it won't
Yeah, I
work.
mean, and again, Baytril is still a very good drug. It's a very important drug. It's an important drug for all of us, but it's an important drug to reserve maybe as a second choice too. So, um, and again, if you happen to be seeing someone who's reptiles very specialized color wise, if you're seeing a chameleon, if you're seeing some of these ball pythons with variable, with these beautifully colored, scaled and crazy genetics, they're not going to want you to inject Baytril and change the color or potentially scar their reptile. So another word of caution with Baytril: make it your second choice. Critical situations, maybe reach for something else first. Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, something to think about of like be ready for those skin problems because it's not going to be covered up by fur.
Yes. Yeah, in a dog or cat, you're probably not going to see a big white tuft of white fur growing out of a
Right.
scar. In an animal that's, again, especially chameleons, whose skin is fascinating with its chromatophores and changing color. They just seem to be really sensitive to Baytril. It's a wonderful drug for them at times, but caution, caution, yeah.
Watch out with those
So,
guys.
yeah, I mean, luckily chameleons are not particularly common pets. They're another one that I'll go back to the humidity factor for them. It turns out super critical. But if you get too humid, then they get yeast and fungal infections. Ugh, chameleons. Ugh, ugh,
This is why they're not common
challenging.
pets.
They're not common pets. And again, thank goodness they really are for advanced reptile keepers. They are hard to take. They're cool. They're fascinating. And when they do well, they're amazing. But oh,
But man, you got to do some work. You got to have an idea what you're doing before you go down that road.
yeah, they're not my first choice. They're not my second choice. I bet most reptile vets will tell you they're a good fifth or sixth choice at best. Yeah.
That is good to know, especially if we're offering guidance or something like that. Like start with your geckos and work your way
Start
up.
with the geckos. Yeah. Um, I would say crested geckos, leopard geckos. Come on. You love them. They're good. They're safe.
Yes,
They're
you can
easy.
graduate into a beardy and
Yeah. Go from
yeah,
there. Absolutely.
absolutely.
Oh, don't start with them. The other thing I will say to veterinarians, and this is because I see this as a fairly common tool that we use that maybe isn't well understood, because when we have dogs or cats, we roll them around underneath an X-ray machine. If you're gonna talk to a reptile owner about getting radiographs, do a little bit of research, because a lot of times the kind of commonly accepted and best x-ray techniques involve keeping the animal upright and actually shooting, instead of up down plane and in a cross plane, so horizontal beam x-rays are really common in reptiles, and a lot of reference books will help you look at them as a horizontal beam x-ray. So turtles and tortoises are a classic one. We love three x-rays on them. One, typical DV. Love it. It's easy, easy to get in a tortoise. You put them on there, you walk away, you take an x-ray. Lovely, done. No beam exposure for your staff. Brilliant. The next one tends to be looking through them sideways, so a lateral. But if you're trying to hold them on their side, the problem that we see with that is then the organs are much looser in them, because it is a coelom, not a separate thorax abdomen. So the organs shift, and what you're going to see moves quite a bit. So it's really ideal to shoot laterally through the turtle tortoise, to get a good X-ray. And then the last view we look for in turtles tortoises standard is cranial to caudal. So literally looking straight through them. We get great views of their lungs. But again, if you hold them up or devise a system to hold them up, hopefully you're not doing this with your hands too. Um, Radiation exposure. Everything's going to shift around again, and you're not going to get great views. So same even with lizards, is we tend to shoot their laterals in a horizontal beam fashion. Um, Snakes, the whole like coiling them up and just looking through them is lovely, but it's a little bit challenging to get good x-rays on these guys. So I will say, if you're ready to take that step, and then maybe that's a step two for you, I'm doing more than triage, I'm doing more than these other things, really study your standard radiographic views in reptiles, so that if we get them in exotic practice afterwards, we can still use your x-rays as a good diagnostic, to really see what's going on.
Absolutely. See if you can shift I'm trying to picture because I know some like a lot of generators you can shift where the beam
Yes.
is and then
Yeah.
so just knowing how to move your plate, how to move your generator
Yeah,
and
exactly.
your
It's really fun to like. I've talked to a lot of small animal vets, and they're like, "I don't think our X-ray machine does that," and their tech is like, "Yes, it does.
it
Hold on."
definitely does that. And
Yeah.
it's so cool. And then my fear whenever I do that though is like, can I put it back? Like did I just
Always,
ruin
always
x-rays
the
for the
check.
week?
Right? Like, am I stuck doing this for everything
Yeah.
now? Every single thing. We're just gonna have the dog and the cat stand on the X-ray machine, hope for the best. Yeah. So,
Everything's oblique from here on out.
yeah, there's also some, again, really new, exciting research out on oblique views, especially in turtles and tortoises, to look at like their pelvic girdle, to look at their in their pardon me, their thoracic girdle too, to like really study for broken bones and things like that. So kind of exciting stuff. Yeah. And then, blood draws, they're tough. Do your best, study up, and just be gentle. That's it. I mean, I think we all know that, right? Like if you're working on a small animal, don't draw more than, 1% body weight, ideally 0.5%. And make sure the lab knows you're submitting, because I've had some things sent to me and they're like, it's just listed as snake, so there's no reference ranges, and I'm like, oh yeah, try and get your reference, try and get your labs a good idea of what species you're drawing on. Snake is not good enough. There's better ranges if you're like ball python, corn snake.
I
You're
had
gonna
no idea.
it happens a lot. Yeah, don't send me blood that the lab looked at as turtle.
Turtle. I have sent
Yeah,
it in as well, it wasn't blood, it was poop, as bearded dragon. I figured poop
that's
was poop
okay.
was poop.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, no, it is and it isn't because every once in a while they'll look under the microscope and they'll be like, "What is that?" Yeah, and our reptiles do have some commensal parasites too. So again, that's helpful to the lab if you submit a stool sample, you're not worrying about amoeba in an iguana. They're supposed to be there. That's good for them. So, it's good for them to know exactly what you're submitting.
Kind of on the, parasite path that, like routine deworming and things like that. It sounds like not only in reptiles, but in several species, we're kind of going the way of like, if it's not causing a problem, let's not create more resistance.
Yeah, not only resistance, but I think we see more side effects with some antiparasites in reptiles in general. Obviously, I think most people know the no ivermectin in turtles and tortoises rule. It absolutely can be fatal to them. But, even something as mild as fenbendazole, which we know one of the side effects of fenbendazole is bone marrow suppression. But in most of, our pet species, dogs, cats, many large animals, it's so minor. You don't it's not truly a side effect. Like we know it happens, but it's not like you don't see it. It's not clinically apparent. Whereas fenbendazole in some of our reptile patients seem to cause pretty significant bone marrow depression. And so they'll get anemic from it. They'll get a low white cell count. And so again, you have to kind of balance things like, okay, I would give this animal fenbendazole, but it's already sick, it's already anemic. Maybe that's not worth it, or maybe I need to approach that different, or what are my treatment goals here? Is it worth it? Is it worth the risk? Has the owner been informed of the risk? And we decided together, yeah, we're going to do this even though it's a risk. So lots of things to think about there. And also there's just not a lot of research. So
Sure.
the classic one is that we see quite a bit. Bearded dragons, they get a lot of pinworms. They're probably normal. It's not a big deal. A lot of them come from their food. They come from their insects that they eat. Oh well, they're not causing a problem. We don't even really know. A lot of them are they parasites or are they pseudoparasites? Are they just passing through? Mm, eh. So if they're just passing through, they're not causing a problem.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
know we're not really like, we're not, especially like you're talking about, coming from their food and stuff like that. It's not like we're solving a permanent problem here. They're
exactly,
just
exactly.
going
They're
to
gonna
come
get more.
back. Yeah.
They're gonna
So
get
if we're
more.
not causing a problem, let's not introduce
Yeah,
drugs.
absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, save the drugs, save the animal from, some potential side effects. Really think about
Hmm.
what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, like I forgot that fenbendazole did that because yeah, we just like feel like you could give them, like 5 times the dose. I think is what they tested it on in dogs and cats, and they were like they were fine. It's no big
Fine.
deal.
Yeah. Meanwhile, you give like the published dose to, a chameleon and it dies. It's like, oh,
I
ugh.
feel like you'd
Oh
be like
no,
that can
no,
happen.
yeah.
Like
Oh, never mind. Sorry. Oops. Yeah, no. So
yeah. Oh,
you have to be careful. Again, so much species variation across the gamut. We think drugs are safe, and they are, right? They really are, but maybe not in that.
I mean, it makes sense. Where this is obviously a different species, but the metabolisms are so much slower. They're so much different. Organ systems are very different from what we see in mammals, and so yeah, it makes sense that they would metabolize everything different. And there probably is, maybe 10, 15 years from now, we're going to be talking about all the reptile specific drugs that are now available because we've learned so much more about them.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we'll start to see again more research, more understanding of why these things happen. And is it we can't use it in certain species, or again, is it we can't use it with certain conditions because maybe these parasites are actually causing some bone marrow suppression, and then who knows, maybe the opposite. Maybe they're stimulating the bone marrow and now we stop. I don't know. And that's the thing, we don't know. We don't know why this is happening. Is it just a drug side effect, or is it this drug can't be used in this species, or is it this drug can't be used with this condition? But
TBD.
yeah, exactly, CBD. So, you've got to flip open those books. You got to, do a quick Google Scholar search for, to decide cost benefit of every drug. And that can be challenging.
Interesting project. Although when you have like the health of an animal on the line, it's not quite as fun.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I hope this works.
Yeah. And I mean, that's part of what we're doing in a lot of exotic pet medicine is we're trying things, we're informing the owner of risks, and we're saying, you know, pretty much everything's off label.
Right. That's how we operated in small animal for a long time too. And it was challenging, and and sometimes bad things happened, but we did end up learning so much in the long run, and now there's so many more options available. So hopefully along with that growing popularity, the response from the pet industry, we'll start to see more of this research like we're talking about, and less bad things happening because we understand it more.
We do, yeah, and we are finding out new things all the time. Research is ongoing. Yeah,
Well, Dana, I'm really proud of us because I think we have like stayed on topic, maybe better
for
than
the
we
most
ever
part.
have on any podcast. This is I want to like pat us on the back here. And we have other stuff that we wrote down to talk about, and we should absolutely talk about that. We're definitely going to start getting yelled at by the powers that be for going off on tangents. So, if we can cover one more topic, I'd really like to talk about reptile euthanasia. Like that's one of those things as, a non-reptile practitioner, a non-exotic practitioner that we get faced with. These, like people will come in and like I have this emergency and you're like, "Oh gosh, like yes, this looks like it needs to be euthanized. Now what do I do?" So can you kind of give us some pointers there?
This is the number one question I get from colleagues. Like somebody would be like frantically texting me. They're like, I picked up an ER shift. I picked up an ER shift, and there's a, turtle, snake, iguana, and this is happening. And I really think it needs to be euthanized. Am I crazy? And usually, I mean, let's be honest, we as vets, we know when things are really bad.
Yeah.
Thing that's, it's in bad shape, it's nearly dead. We've got some sort of severe trauma or something. We've got organs hanging out. We've got bad things happening. So, what do you do then? Obviously there's some challenges there. So, first, I would say, obviously let you've got permission from the owner. Let's go. We're going to forget all the basic stuff. We all know the basic stuff. It's the same as dogs and cats. We've talked to the owner, we have their permission, we have their understanding. Where the differences lie. One, is it a species that's really hard to handle? Is it a turtle, tortoise, a large lizard, a large snake? Sedation. Think about sedation. Look up a big whopping ketamine dose, a big whopping tilazol dose, and go ahead and give that because you're past that. You want this animal, one, you want it to be peaceful for the owner, you want it to be easy to handle. You want to be able to like just make this happen as safely and as humanely as possible. So um this is the part that can get tricky is you know, we're gonna do this all injectably. Forget isoflurane, and I say that in the nicest way. But if you're seeing an animal that's sick, I mean, unless their respiratory rate is increased because of pain, trauma, waiting for isoflurane to kick in, you're like your shift will be over. You'll be wanting to go home.
You'll be passed out on the floor.
Yes, the tortoise will still not be sedate. You will be like waiting. So really, again, can it be done with a very small animal in an emergency? Absolutely. But reptiles, remember, just they metabolize gas anesthesia so slowly. It's just skip it. So even if you're dealing with like a little gecko or a little animal, reach for that tilazol, reach for that ketamine, give it a little injection, go from there. If you have to keep it in a box with isoflurane for a while just to give the injection, do that. But the problem is I would not go from isoflurane to your euthanasia solution just because super unpredictable. They're gonna wake up. You're gonna be like, I thought it was asleep, and now it's bouncing. Now I'm picking it off the ceiling tiles and things like that. So if you're sedating it, go for your injection. Really helpful a lot of times to just get them quieted down, make it safe. For euthanasia, your typical euthanasia solution is just fine. Try and hit a vein, do intercardiac if you've got a sedated animal, do what you've got to do. So, similar doses to dogs and cats. Here's where it gets interesting. With reptiles, we have to think about two types of death. We have to think about cardiac arrest and we have to think about neurologic death, brain death. And we have to remember that reptiles that are really, these are very primitive animals. They've been on for a long time. A lot of them are very adapted to low oxygen environments, low oxygen needs. So cardiac death, in a mammal, heart stops, we know within a few minutes we've got brain death. Great. Not so in a reptile. So
No
we know,
oxygen, no problem.
yeah. We also know that their cardiac cells to a degree are very resilient too, and that they can stop for long periods of time. We know there's a lot of like cold weather species whose heart beats like once every 5 minutes in cold environments. So the other thing I will add is that freezing is not an option until you're very convinced that the animal is passed already. So, freezing is painful for most reptiles and amphibians. Don't do it, not safe. Um, so after your euthazol, I leave my needle in or I leave my catheter in, whether I'm intracardiac or IV, and I follow it with, what I've induced essentially with euthanasia solution is anesthesia. So you have to think about that. I've induced sedation, I've induced anesthesia. Now I have to induce cardiac death. And the way to do that, I follow almost every injection with an injection of KCl. I know I've got anesthesia. I'm not worried about pain. I just pull up like a cc, a couple cc's, and follow my euthanasia solution. A lot of times you will see them relax because they're under anesthesia. They're not dead yet.
They're not dead.
They're not dead yet. Only in reptiles you get like several stages of death. You have like near death, almost dead, definitely dead.
Yeah,
So
I've been involved in those before where I want to say I forget what the euthanasia was, and we had an ECG. This was a long time ago. So we would watch and it was like it's just flat line forever. We're like, okay, are we good? Did it stop? And then yeah, like 2 minutes later it would be like, there's a beat, and you're like, nope, we're still here. We're still
yeah.
here.
So potassium chloride will go ahead and induce cardiac arrest, cardiac death. Now the problem is, again, especially some species, but pretty much all reptiles, what we're finding is that brain death is not quick. We're still in EEG activity long after cardiac death, long after the cessation of circulation. So again, they're under anesthesia. We're pretty confident they're not feeling pain. So yes, at this point, could you put them in the freezer? You could, but we don't know that yet. So now we need to talk about how to induce brain death in these guys. And this, I think, is that one of the hardest things for us as veterinary professionals. We've got to think about how we're going to cause brain death in these guys. And it used to be, we'll talk about decapitation or cervical dislocation. The hard thing is that new research showed that even after decapitation, we still have brain activity in some of these reptiles.
I mean, that makes sense because wouldn't you be trying to like interrupt the blood flow? And that's not really, you've already induced cardiac death. So it's not going to do anything.
Yeah, exactly. So you're like, great. Yes, it's still absolutely an option in an emergency situation, but you have to do something called pithing. So pithing is, basically disrupting the brain, literally damaging the brain tissue. So you've got an animal that you're confident is sedate, you're confident is under anesthesia. Now you've induced cardiac death. Now take a needle, take your IV catheter, take something and go through the top of their skull. Most animals, this is going to be really manageable with like a heavy needle, even the big horses. Yeah. Or sometimes it's 22, it's just size dependent again. And it's gonna sound crazy, but stick it in there, give it a scramble. Now you're good. Um, and then the challenging thing can be, what parts of this do you do in front of the owner? What parts of it do you not?
Yeah, I could see that being. I mean,
So
I could see that being traumatic, like for us as veterinarians,
yes,
of like
and it is.
you're doing it because you want to do the right thing for the animal. You don't want to leave this animal with brain activity that's supposed to be euthanized, just to wake up later. And
So
but yeah, but it's and so we can probably wrap our heads around it, but that would be really traumatic as an
yeah,
owner.
don't do I always say don't do that in front of the owners. Explain to the
Yeah.
owners that you still need to take measures after the animal's death. If you're comfortable doing the euthanol in front of them, go for it. If sometimes I won't even do the KCL, but again, it's not a problem if you do because it doesn't really do anything. It looks like flesh
Right.
and it's clear.
Right.
And then, when we bring the animal back, I'll explain to the owner that we need to do other things with reptiles to make sure. And to be honest, I still sometimes I'm like, let's keep them overnight and just make sure we're not seeing any activity, any movement, that they go into rigor. Then we'll put them in the freezer, or then we'll put them in the fridge, and you can come if you want to come pick them up for home care, you can do that tomorrow. Or, I will put them in the freezer at the end of the day or even the first thing the next morning if we're going to send them out for cremation. So, and the other thing I will say is, you're right, it is hard for us. So do what you've got to do to make sure you're okay, that you're confident, that you're serving the best interest of the animal, because, we do euthanasia all the time, and a lot of us are like very okay with it. We've separated that, those things in our head. We've gone through the emotional work of being okay with euthanizing animals, of understanding it's in their best interest. We're doing it for the right reasons. But it is a little bit challenging to physically, cause brain damage. It takes another part of you, like you said. So make sure you do what you got to do to be okay with it. And if it means, some members of the team are like, I can't today. I respect that. I respect that. But, and sometimes you're not okay. You're like, I'm gonna call and phone a friend. This is
Yeah,
phone a
yeah.
friend time. I need your help with this. It's an animal I've worked on for a long time. I'm just having trouble with this. So,
Yeah,
it's a little
absolutely.
bit like taking those rabies samples in dogs. Sometimes you're like, who's in a really good mental place today and can help
Yeah.
me?
Who's feeling real emotionally stable? Because
Yeah.
we're about to
Who
throw
can
you for
do
a
the
loop.
hard things
Yeah.
today? Because it is hard. It is hard.
Yeah,
And again, I usually still wait to allow the owner, if they're gonna take their remains home. Like,
sure.
let's wait a day.
I think, and if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes before, I that would sound wild to me. But I have, where you're sure. My experience with this is a long time ago, so I may not be remembering like totally clearly, but I don't remember pithing. I might have just not been there for it, or it might have just been a long time ago and we thought that cardiac death was, and we were going to be okay. And yeah, I have absolutely seen reptiles like rise from the dead, and you're like,
Wake back
"Oh,
up.
you're still
Yeah.
alive. Okay, let's do something different." And so I think it's all, really important to know. And I never thought about keeping them overnight. And I would imagine like I would sleep better with that. I couldn't imagine sending a reptile home and then getting that call the next day from the owner of like they're walking around and you're like, "No." And that happens. You didn't do anything wrong, but it's super traumatic.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of veterinarians that have a story out there. They're like, really thought it was dead. It
Mhm.
was not. Just remember those ECGs. You're not doing beats per minute, you're doing you're doing minutes per beat. And,
Yeah.
you just gotta really investigate.
Yes, yes. And like I said, it would sound crazy if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
I will bet every veterinarian, if they haven't had that experience, know someone who has. Yes, it's a 1 degree of separation thing, not a 6 degree of separation thing. So, like, go through those 4 steps, and I would say, I'm sedating the animal now. Now I'm inducing anesthesia. Now I've induced, cardiac death. Now I'm going to induce brain death. So it's a 4 step process, which is, it's like, oh, but yes, anyone can do it. It's just, yeah, got to make sure you take those steps.
You just have to make sure you go through all the steps. One more question about that, because here we go, like with our time and our tangents and all of this, but we've
Yay.
stayed on topic, so I'm proud of us. What about like intracelomic injections and
Yeah.
things like that?
So incredibly challenging in reptiles because, again, if you induce cardiac death, does it enough of it even circulate around to cause brain death? Yeah. And, again, you can even in some small species, you can still do overexposure to isoflurane, like the cotton ball and plastic bag thing, but you have to follow up with the pithing. If you're really confident that you can, you've got cardiac death and or pardon me, you've got, good anesthesia, follow it up with, cardiac death and brain death. And you could skip the KCL, if you're confident you've got an animal that's completely sedated, they're not feeling anything. Maybe you're even starting to see rigor, but I always say, like, make sure you do that one last step so you're extremely confident.
So you're sure, because that's the most humane thing for them. I guess more so my question would be like we talked about to go in intracardiac or intravenous, and I know like with intraorgan injections or intraperitoneal and small animal, we're like if they are fully anesthetized, yes, like intraorgan, intraperitoneal, absolutely. If I would imagine that like that's not going to work if you just get it into a body cavity in a reptile. There's no way they're going to absorb that. Is that right?
Very, yeah. I mean, you might induce anesthesia. You're not going to induce cardiac and brain death that way. So not a lot of research on that yet. Again, because of the shape of their kidneys, you're not looking at an intrarenal injection. Their kidneys are really
Right.
small and tucked up against their body wall. It's not easy. In theory, intrahepatic injection should work.
Maybe.
But and probably at times we miss intracardiac when we do intracoelomic and get it in a vein somehow. But
Okay.
again, do your best. Make sure and again, don't skip that heavy sedation portion.
Right.
Worst case scenario, you give so much ketamine that you're not seeing them breathe, you're not seeing a heart rate, you're really confident they're not feeling pain, and then you go to that last step, you go to pit them, and that works too. So
Sure.
the big thing is just control any possible pain response, and you're still acting humanely in the best interest of the animal. Yeah.
Sure. That makes sense. That makes sense. And it is kind of a little bit comforting to hear you say, like, we're going for intracardiac, and there's a good chance that occasionally it doesn't go where we think it went. And they still become anesthetized. So,
Yes.
it'll be okay in that regard. Just like you said, go through the steps. Make sure you do all the steps.
Nothing simple. Nothing simple. So
No, but that's what makes them so much fun.
yeah, it really is.
Well, Dana, thank you for joining me. This is always fun. I learned so much in this episode. I always do, but like this was, I don't know, you really turned a lot of lights on in my brain with this conversation. And I really do want to come back to like these other couple of questions because I have to know more of the myths.
Good. Well, it was great to be here. I always love talking with reptiles. I'll, probably could spend 2 days just if you sat me in a room and didn't interrupt me, just away. But, we'll keep it short and sweet.
Man, if I had more time in my life, I would take you up on that.
Hard to do. Yes.
Dana, thank you so much for joining me. This was such a fun episode, and I at least feel more knowledgeable. If not more confident, I suppose that will come with time, but definitely much more knowledgeable when it comes to reptile husbandry and medicine. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode as much as I did. If you did, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. It'll help other veterinary professionals like you find this and other great content we try to put out there. For more episodes like this, click on the Education tab on the Vetfolio website. As always, we'd love to hear your input on this talk, as well as ideas for topics you'd like to hear from us in the future. Feel free to reach out to me at dvm@vetfolio.com. You can also visit my Facebook page at Dr. Cassie DVM, and you can find me on LinkedIn. And remember, if one animal is better off because of you today, it's a great day.